I'm
Harley said
Like
she
you're
didn't pay
gay, but we're
chances.
kind of.
So we got
I'm very curious about how you guys are going to integrate. Yes.
By the way, we never did the panic dance that we were supposed to do.
Yeah, we never did.
Okay, well, we'll panic eventually. Hold on. Let's get going on women's rights. All right, let's talk about Republican motherhood. Republican motherhood, we talked about before, was, Brenda spitting out American children who are going to carry on the legacy of American republicanism. But Republican motherhood is going to start to evolve and mean something different. It's still going to be women-focused, but now, remember we talked about before in the Puritan era, who was actually passing on the morality, the social morality in the family, the men or the women? The men were. But as time goes on, specifically as women are gaining social power, obviously this happens slowly, but Republican motherhood is going to start being focused on women being the moral voice in a family, the softer voice, advocating for children. And so now Republican motherhood is not just producing a bunch of babies, but it's also caring for those babies in a different way than women had cared about them before. And this is going to express itself in social change. So let's talk about this as it relates to women's rights specifically. All right, there's a whole list of women who start to become active in the mid-19th century that's important for us to know. Many of them will end up popping up in your AP English class, right? Is everybody taking AP English or has taken AP English before? This will become very apparent in class. And so I guess Kevin, you took AP last year, right?
Yeah.
We'll get to that. Do what?
The
Anal woman, yeah. The Sojourner Truth thing. First off was Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. These two women are going to be the principal organizers behind the Seneca Falls Convention. And we're going to get to Seneca Falls soon enough, but these women are on the forefront of pushing for early women's movement stuff like right to vote, women having property rights, women being seen legally as equal with men. Women had talked about this individually, but in 1848 at Seneca Falls, which is in New York, this is the first convention that encodes this idea, and they officially and as a unit asked for the right to vote. Women asked for women's suffrage. This is 1848. This is 72 years before they actually achieved the women's right to vote. In fact, at Seneca Falls, which is down a little bit further, like I said, 1848 New York, they write and sign something called the Declaration of Sentiments. It's important you know this. The Declaration of Sentiments is similar to the Declaration of Independence.
Isn't the wording almost?
The Declaration of Sentiments says that all men and women are created equal. At this document, they are calling for women's suffrage. An organized group meeting and declaring their right to equality and demanding the right to suffrage. And Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton are two of the organizers. Obviously, Susan B. Anthony is an important part of this too. I'm sure you've heard of Susan B. Anthony before. She was a militant lecturer, an intellectual. She was a Quaker, fought profoundly for women's rights to vote, in addition to being an abolitionist. We're going to watch some clips from a movie called Iron-Jawed Angels. It's about women. I think some of you who had me for government economics, we saw some of those. Remember those clips that I showed you?
No, force feeder.
Yeah, the force feeding folks and stuff. Remember that?
we saw right for lunch.
We'll see some of that. In fact, I let APUS watch the whole thing last year. The movie itself actually isn't. It's okay. But those scenes are particularly powerful. And Susan B. Anthony was essentially the forerunner that allowed 3 generations later for those women to fight for the right to vote, Alice Paul specifically. Then we talked about, I don't know if you guys remember, I asked Wampler and she remembered it, the Grimke sisters. What type of person, if anybody in the country, would be the least likely in the 1840s to push for women's rights and the abolition of slavery? Southern rich people. The Grimke sisters, Angelina and Sarah Grimke, were daughters of privilege. They grew up on a plantation. They were wealthy, and their family owned tons of slaves, and they end up becoming radical arguers for women's rights and for the abolition of slavery, which is pretty impressive considering where they came from. The fact that if my daughter ends up arguing for the rights of minorities and ends up being liberal and environmentalist, is it all that ridiculous to consider that my daughter would do that? No. But if you're a slave-holding daughter of wealthy plantation owners, and you become an abolitionist who fights for the rights of women and slaves, that's a big deal. And later, I think Angelina Grimke will end up marrying an important abolitionist we'll get to later next chapter. We talked about Lucy Stone, and she is a militant writer, but she also is going to be famous for keeping her last name. And none of you guys want to keep your last name? We're all getting rid of it?
Mine's too long. Can't nothing out of it with one.
Frederick Lebinowitz or something like that?
Yeah.
Frederick Smith? I'm going to make my daughter keep her name. Actually, she won't marry, so I don't have to worry about it. Physics nun. She's going to be a nun and be a scientist nun. That's what I'm hoping for her. That's funny.
Combination.
Probably should have just been like, yeah.
Scientist nun, it's not an interesting combination, it's a wonderful combination.
It is, but it's unusual for the two to meet.
She can solve she can solve issues and be a nun at the same time and live with me and never leave my house. And always be close to her father. What?
She was
They don't live in a church, they live in a convent. It depends. But she is going to live with me.
So you're gonna violate that rule.
Yes. All right. Who's Amelia Bloomer? Do you know why she became famous?
for bloomers.
She rejected what women were wearing. She wore bloomers. What do you think people called her? She's rejecting wearing these long dresses. Road whore. Turbo slut.
I'm sure that was
That's what I used to call Hester Prynne. Miss Ray, Miss Boone's great. Miss Ray, though, I don't think Miss Boone's as wild about Hester Prynne as Miss Ray was, but Miss Ray loved her some Hester Prynne. And do what?
She told us about this in class.
And I used to have the most fun giving Hester Prynne a hard time for being morally defunct. And I had a little girl, she wasn't little, so 5'11", but she sat right there named Victoria Milam. And Victoria was awesome. She's so funny. She was an awesome artist. And she drew this big paper, and instead of it saying Playboy on it, it said Play Puritan. And it had a picture of Hester Prynne showing her ankle and knee. And it said something about Hester Prynne being like morally defunct, and we gave it to Miss Ray, and she was really upset about it. It was awesome. She hated that when I called Hester Prynne a turbo slut. She would get real mad. She would say, "Woo!" And her hands would go up here. You know what I'm saying? When she gets happy, her hands go up.
Is she a lot like Miss Hensley? Or similar?
No. She is not like that. I mean, I like Miss Hensley just fine, but they're not.
Well, in mannerisms?
No.
'Cause,
No. Nope. And then Margaret Fuller. This is one thing I was going to talk about also when it comes to AP. You guys aren't in AP yet to Transcendentalists, right? I'm sure Kevin and Karen, do you remember Transcendentalists last year?
Is that the remaining
And AP English?
Yes, we're talking.
We just started.
Oh, you just started Transcendentalist. Margaret Fuller was a Transcendentalist author. In fact, she wrote for a journal called The Dial. She was so if you think about why this is important, she was a contributor to an intellectual and literary movement. And this is important because she had the social and educational wherewithal to contribute to a very, very esteemable literary movement. Full disclosure, I hate Transcendentalism and I hate reading it. And it's the worst part of your AP English class. I'll guarantee it's the most boring part.
You didn't like it at
I
all?
like it. Like, I really like
No, it was the worst.
Wow.
When I would read Thoreau, have you read Thoreau yet?
Yeah.
Dear God,
I liked it.
Where I was or where I am.
Oh my God! 17 paragraphs that all were one sentence about a leaf. Move on, man. I can't take it. It's the worst.
The one we just read by Emerson, the one we just read by Emerson was about the stars and everything. That was good.
Emerson is fine. Thoreau is not.
Yeah, I think that was
genius.
I don't know, I was
One
impressed
of the
with
four was
Thoreau.
okay. It wasn't my favorite.
Uncivil Disobedience is great. I didn't like Walden. Okay, it reminds me of, and you'll get to this, and you guys got to that when you got to the Lost Generation, right? When you get to like Fitzgerald and Hemingway, and there was an author who was an openly gay female who all of these guys, Faulkner, Fitzgerald, Hemingway, all of them, who gave their work to her to edit because she was who they respected the most. You know what I'm talking about? It's Gertrude Stein. In the 1920s. She's amazing, and she is the head of this hugely important generation of American writers who most historians will say was the best period of American literature ever, right? If you haven't seen it, do you know what movie I'm talking about where Owen Wilson's character goes back in time accidentally and he runs...
Doesn't he use Hemingway?
Yeah. It's called Midnight in Paris. If you haven't seen Midnight in Paris, you need to. It will make you supremely happy. Anytime I'm sad with the world, I get on DVR and I go down to Midnight in Paris and I watch it. You can't not be happy when you watch this movie. It's just so fun. Owen Wilson is this Hollywood writer, and he's in Paris with his fiancée who sucks. And he's kind of a romantic, and he loves Paris, and he wants to be a writer, like write a book, not write movies. And he goes on strolls in Paris, and he loves Paris. And one night, it's about midnight, and he gets in this cab, and it's kind of a weird-looking cab, and it goes back in time, and he starts hanging out with Hemingway. He goes in this place, and he's like, hello, and he meets people, and he can't believe it's Hemingway, and it's Scott Fitzgerald, and his wife Zelda Fitzgerald, and all these famous people are there. Like, he meets Dolly, and he meets all these famous artists and stuff, and he's hanging out with them, and he just can't believe it. He's having the best time. And the next morning, he goes back, and he walks back to his hotel, and it's back to the 21st century, and then every night, he tells his fiancée, I'm going to go for a walk now. And then he goes, and he gets in this car, and the next thing he visits people, and he falls in love with this woman who hangs out with Picasso and stuff, and it's just amazing. And the people who play these 1920s authors and artists are hysterical. The guy who plays Hemingway is great. He's my favorite author. And the guy who plays him is great. You need to watch it. It will make you so happy. The movie's so good. Stop that. Okay.